Welcome to Recombination Nation. Today I'm talking to Professor Peter Ward. He's a paleontologist who has extended his passion for the deep past of life on Earth to consider the deep future that's stretching away in front of us. He was also behind the rare Earth hypothesis, one that's a favorite of mine, and he has written a stack of popular science books on topics from across many aspects of life on Earth and beyond it. So that's kind of my snapshot of who we're talking to today. Peter, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and the journey through life that kind of led to where you are today?
Well, they weren't popular enough because I'm still at my day job at 76 years old. Just like all kids, I grew up in love with dinosaurs. And then, like, I'm happily enough, I never quit being a kid. So I've been able to think about dinosaurs for all these years. But dinosaurs are just the tip of the iceberg, of course, and the hothouse and the other many other worlds of the history of life on Earth. But the fun part about it was I was lucky enough to be around really smart people that intrigued me about how could we apply the history of life on Earth to understanding the frequency of life in the cosmos. And up till when we really started thinking about what lessons might be universal and what lessons might be so rare that, in fact, they're not universal at all. How rare a planet are we? And what in our deep history of time would put us apart as a rare planet in the cosmos? So I guess that's a snapshot.
Okay, okay. I love it. So let's have I really got onto your work through your book Future Evolution, and that came out, I think, about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit more.
Oh, I think 25 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Looking back on its near future predictions, how well do you think you did, and how well has the general thesis stood up with recent developments on top of that? And what's surprised you?
So far, not a whole lot in that we haven't had enough time in 25 years to really produce much evolution in higher taxa, as you know.
Mm.
In terms of bacteria, I wish we would have thought more about how bacterial lineages and prokaryotes would be dealing with the Anthropocene. What are the processes that are affecting bacteria? It's funny, Shane, this morning there was an article in the New York Times from Carl Zimmer, who's a friend of mine. Carl's really good at picking up trends. And for the first time ever, there's a bunch of bacteriologists saying, save the bacteria. That we really have to think about the species of bacteria themselves, which are going extinct because of humankind. And I've never thought about that really, of course he's right. I
Mhm.
mean, if the thing about thinking about science fiction, which we all do, if you had to take out some generation ship where you're sending out into the cosmos a big spaceship with all the humans. And then, of course, the thought experiment is what animals and plants need to go. But you really need to start that thought experiment. What bacteria need to go?
Yeah,
As
yeah.
you, if we didn't have nitrifying bacteria in our soil, no, we'd starve to death.
Hmm.
And so life on Earth would radically change. So going forward, I bet there has been a huge amount of bacterial evolution in the last 25 years because of humans and what humans have done. We haven't seen the carnivorous crows that we talked about flying around, picking off the rare human. But it's funny you say this. There was a fabulous set of producers of an Australian broadcasting company. I guess I can say this. There's a television show they're shooting right now on future evolution.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yes. And
Oh.
so I'm not a producer, but for the last 6 months, I've been having these 2 or 3 hour conversations with those that are writing the show. So it's 3 episodes. It's a joint production of ABC and Tele-France. So it's a joint French-Australian production.
Mm.
And as I wryly said, having known many, many French people, how's that working out? And they say, yeah, well, there's some of that going on. We really, we really have some debates. I guess debate is the word for they fight like dogs and cats. But nevertheless, it's very interesting. They're flying me to Papua New Guinea in a month.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to see my old friend, the Nautilus.
Mm.
And what we have is a far future episode where Nautilus is still there and, in fact, has taken over down there But Shane, the really interesting thing that's going on is the cephalopods haven't waited for 1 billion years from now to take over. There was a great paper coming out of University of Adelaide in 2014. And I forget, Doubleday, I think was the woman's name. I may have missed the name. I'm sorry if I missed her name wrong.
Mm,
But this woman tracked the catch of cephalopods to you guys
mm,
and girls, um, worldwide over the last 20 years before 2014. And the catch of cephalopods kept increasing, whereas the catch of fish kept decreasing.
mm,
And it makes total sense because I study these deep waters where I've been looking in PNG and many other places. The nautiluses are taking over. There's huge numbers down there. Well, what have
wow.
we done? We've removed their predators, the
Hmm.
bony fish and the cartilaginous fish, the stuff that eats them. So with the removal of fish, people would much rather eat fish than cephalopods. So there's been preferential heavy fishing. And we put down deep water cameras to 100, 200, 300, 400 meters. I've done it off the Great Barrier Reef, Vanuatu, and Fiji, all over the Pacific for the last 20 years because we're trying to figure out how many there were.
Mm,
And a net result of that, by the way, I'm very proud to say, 2017, our work was used to finally get CITES to list Nautilus as an endangered species, and the United States followed thereafter. But we had to do this with cameras, but every year I go back to PNG, there's more of them.
mm,
There's
mm,
fewer fish and more nautilus and other cephalopods. And 2 weeks ago, or a week ago, New York Times again, there was a great article from England where the English crab fishermen were saying all we are catching in our traps now are octopus.
mm.
And the English don't really like octopus. And they say, what are we going to do with all these bloody octopus? But apparently there's a huge explosion of octopus. It's the same phenomena. I look at mass extinctions. 2022, I walked another beautiful beach in England, Somerset Beach. It faces Wales. It has a Triassic, late Triassic, 200 million-year-old rocks overlain by early Jurassic. And you see the extinction taking place, the big five Triassic, Jurassic mass extinction. And the early Jurassic rocks, all you see are ammonites
Mm.
and nautiluses. There's no bony fish fossils whatsoever. Same thing. The fish get wiped out, the cephalopods take over. Who knows if this is a permanent takeover? Probably not. But if we humans keep fishing, this is a new era.
They could the cephalopods could unionize if there's enough of them down there.
Well, they're certainly going to have to turn into cannibals because a lot of what they eat is now disappearing. The big ones eat the little fish, the
Mm,
big fish eat the little cephalopods, but that system that is so ancient is now being heavily perturbed.
mm. I had one little thought when you were talking about microbes and the tools that have emerged probably in the last 10 to 15 years to sample microbial diversity in the environment. It reminds me of like a horror movie. They're out in a dark forest and they light a lighter for the first time and realize that there's all these creatures around them staring at them that they had no idea were there. That feels like that kind of a moment. We've suddenly realized there's this huge complexity in the microbial world, and that we're losing it in our, at least our human microbiome is rapidly losing microbial diversity, and we don't completely understand what that's doing to us.
And that could be one of the scariest things facing humanity without us realize. Oh, look, 20 years ago, we had no idea how many different species are within us, really. It's
Mm,
such new science.
mm,
And I wrote a book, my least popular book of all time was my last, probably is my last book about epigenetics.
mhm,
And so, what is the epigenetic consequence of changing your gut biome? Because it certainly affects every bit of us, and it's getting into our germ cells,
mm, mm.
sperm and eggs, and the epigenetic content that they're taking on. It's an interesting new world we're just learning about.
We'll get back to talking about your outlook on writing books and like that whole ecosystem of publishing towards the end. I'll make a note on that. But I wanted to ask, so you've written that the current mass extinction is unique because it's been driven by human beings, a biotic factor. And I wonder how that compares to the rise of the trilobites in the Cambrian. I believe they were the first organisms to get slicing jaws and armored bodies, and they just went crazy on all of the other emerging animal phyla, and also the Great Oxidation Event. Where suddenly the atmosphere turned toxic to all of the creatures who'd never seen oxygen in those concentrations before.
Well, I'm so glad to hear you say that because we are inundated in popular press and parlance about this idea of the big five,
Mm,
five great mass extinctions. And in our book, New History of Life with Joe Kirschvink, what I tried to say is that if we are in one now, which I do believe, and it's very different, it's number 10. It's
hmm
not big five. And you just mentioned two of them.
mm,
At the end of the Cambrian, and where you're really starting to see some of the Cambrian events, that was a major mass extinction. The Great Oxygenation Event was perhaps the single greatest mass extinction in terms of the percentage of biota that dies out of all of them. And
hmm
so I've asked over and over. I mean, when oxygen first appeared as such a heavy poison, it must have decimated, more than decimated. Decimation means 1 in 10, doesn't it?
hmm
How does one say 99 out of 100, a mate, of the world in the species just dying out right, left, and center?
mm.
So it's to me, we've had these big events in the past, and every one has its own unique flavor. The rise of plants. I teach a course called The History of Life. Of course I do. And glib, which I am sometimes, because I'm still nervous after all these years. I talk to these kids, they're really smart. But I have a short, pithy statement. I said, in the history of life, when the big things happen, always blame plants.
Yes.
We love plants, but if you start looking at the big stuff that really happens, that affects the gas exchange, that affects carbon dioxide, and I guess the real point is when big bad things happen, look at carbon dioxide first.
hmm
Is there a more powerful molecule in the cosmos? I mean, the fact that we can go from 280, 310, 320 base of the Industrial Revolution and everything's fine, even have a little ice age, to just 200 years and we're up into the 400s heading for 1,000. And what the consequences have been to the world. And I tell my students, get a little jar and take 400 of these molecules with a million others and make it 500 out of a million and
mm
watch what happens.
hmm
That's power. So again, we are just discovering who rules the planet, how the rules are made, and we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it has been a very hot and cold running planet
That's
over its
good. I'll remember that. I'm gonna steal that. That's great.
we've swung back and forth between like snowball Earth and hothouse conditions, and then I guess the most recent period was smaller oscillations back and forth between ice ages.
Maybe you could say that. It's great in a hotel, hot and cold running water, but you don't want it on a planet. We got a new button here. We could patent this.
Well, does the overall trend suggest leveling out, that the extremes in the past were more extreme than the recent past?
Can I be political?
hmm
I'm just it's funny. I did a 2 hour podcast for NPR yesterday. For some reason, out of the blue, after being exiled for a while, I've been discovered again.
hmm
And NPR was asking a lot of questions and somewhat similar to what you're asking. And they wanted to know about warming, global warming. This used to be everywhere, global warming. Then we called it climate change. But it's, again, going back to carbon dioxide.
mm
To me, just one of the greatest tragedies of the last 10 years, 5 years, the last 2 years since the last presidential election is the politics of the world turning away from the realization that climate change is the single greatest threat that we know of that we're facing. It may be the bacterial problems that you're talking about, microbial world, which really runs this world, has big, bad, scarier stuff in store for us. We don't know.
mm.
But to me, my simple view of the Earth history is it's what we're doing, burning all the fossil fuel and creating CO2 increase. Every one of those mass extinctions, except the end of the Cretaceous, was caused by too high CO2
mm.
or one time the Ordovician, too little CO2. And the KT was still, we had that decadent traps. And so you had an asteroid that has been exacerbated by too much CO2.
Mm.
And so here we are again, too much CO2. What don't we get?
And I also wonder too, like the Industrial Revolution from a geological uh, timescale is a sudden slap to the system, but it's presumably going to come to an end at some point in the next century or two. The resources that we're burning through at a rapid rate, estimates suggest is some limit to them. There might even be economic limits to or political limits to all of them being burnt. We can hope. But what do you think the aftershocks or the after effects of that will be? Like when we no longer have all of our fossil fuel powered technology and tools, but we're still living in a world with elevated CO2 for presumably thousands of years into the future.
Well, we had this, I don't know if you remember, there was a sense 10 years, 20, whenever I think something is 10 years ago, it's inevitably 20 to 30 years ago. But do you remember that was the sense that we were about to run out of oil? There
Mm,
was this big bunch of people saying we're just hitting the end of oil.
mm,
That's not true at all. Every year, more is found. And so this idea that even in a century we've gone through it, there's so much hydrocarbon on this planet buried away here and there.
mm,
And that it still remains, even if it costs more and more to get it, it's still the most, as it is, the cheapest form of really quick, easy energy. And capitalism is going to always go for the cheapest fix. I mean, look what's happened in America. The sense in Los Angeles that if even a third of the houses put on solar on top of their roofs, the amount of electricity that would be saved could power much of California.
mm,
It's so powerful. And yet it's become a bad word in this country because of the current administration.
mm.
Take it all down. No, no, none of that. He is being paid by the oil industry. The oil industry wants to pump more CO2 in the atmosphere. There we are.
Mm. Well, I
So I
guess,
think,
oh,
yeah, but
yeah, no, I was just trying to get a sense, like, I don't know, 3, 4, 500 years in the future, where I think almost anyone would agree that the rate at which we're using fossil fuels, they will no longer be a viable resource, but we will still be living in a world with elevated CO2. And I wonder if you have any intuitions about how human society could respond, could adapt to those conditions where we don't have all of our presumably, well, maybe we don't end up cracking fusion and unlimited in inverted commas sources of other energy. Have you spared any thoughts to thinking what human civilization would be like? I mean, it's almost like a hothouse medieval kind of scenario.
but on the other hand, the sea level rise is going to take place.
Yeah,
And again,
yeah.
another one of my benighted books, Our Flooded World. And it's happening just about the same rate that was predicted when I wrote that book 20, 15, 20 years ago. It's again the trouble with rising seas, it's about the food for humans. Yes, it takes out living space, but what it takes out much more thoroughly, that's much more dangerous, are rice paddies.
Yeah,
If you think about
floodplains.
how much of rice fuels human growth and human populations in the world today, and seawater goes sideways much easier than it goes up. And so you can have a small vertical rise in sea level, gigantic horizontal inundation of salt into the agricultural fields. And
Hmm.
so I'm really thinking that 200 or 300 years from now, we're going to have at least, oh, maybe 5 meters more of
Mm.
sea level rise, which will have inundated the really Asian low rice paddies. There will have been, I think, unless we can come up with much better ways to feed ourselves, um, gigantic amounts of human migrations, as we know, out of the low-lying areas, which are going to lead to conflict as well as starvation.
Mm.
So I'm seeing the human population dropping.
Well, to make an analogy, the last time this happened, at the Holocene, 11-ish thousand years ago, that likely triggered massive human migrations in response to the steadily rising sea levels. And there's been some people arguing that disruption in culture and ecosystems helped trigger the transition to agriculture. That people and ecosystems were put under such unprecedented pressure that they had to improvise whole new strategies for survival. Do you think something similar to that Holocene transition is ahead in coming centuries?
What do they say about nothing concentrates the mind more than you're about to get hanged? I mean, there's some sort of pithy statement here.
Mm,
So it's going to become more and more clear to
mm,
humanity that as the sea level continues to rise, the ice continues to disappear, the climate continues to change, and the amount of agriculture that we can undergo is rapidly changing, that we're going to have to change some rules around here. I guess the obvious, most scary aspect to all of this is how many nuclear weapons are stuck around here.
mm,
Catherine Bigelow, one of my favorite directors, has just come out with a nuclear Armageddon movie that just opened in the US 2 days ago. I read the book that led to this. It's so scary.
mm,
But let's just put that aside. I mean, we're putting, yeah, the little genie in the box that could wipe us all out.
mm,
I mean, the human populations during the Holocene sea level rise you're talking about were so minuscule compared to now. You're talking a few millions of people compared to billions. Uh,
mm,
Thousands of millions of people compared to millions of people is a whole different ballpark.
mm.
But you're right. You never know. We're very clever monkeys, and what is going about to happen? Who knows what it will do? What I do think is that Elon and those who want to think that we can colonize Mars and get away with a second nest for our human eggs are so unbelievably wrong.
Mm.
The technology, the amount of resources, the amount of more CO2 you'd have to put into the atmosphere to put humans on Mars and keep them there alive. I mean, it's just foolish thinking. We're here on this particular homeworld, and there isn't anything close by where we can go live.
Is human culture capable of getting its head around slow-moving disasters? So, like a nuclear Armageddon is very easy to imagine, but 3 centuries of relentless sea level rise is slippery. It's kind of hard to even like get your head around it as, a person just living as a human being.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right. I think any lesson, the whole lesson, both of sea level rise and of temperature change, the global temperature changes, because they are so slow moving, you can't get anybody to pay attention to either at the moment, in a sense. I
Mm,
mean, they're not high up on the agenda. Just yesterday, one of the really important climate change aspects was the new treaty to try to reduce carbon emissions by cargo ships. That was discontinued
mm,
by fiat order, by who knows who runs whatever they run. The billionaires run this planet now,
mhm.
and among them, they decided we don't need this anymore. The slow-moving catastrophes, I think, as you say, are the hardest for a public that has the intelligence that we do to do anything about. Our particular intelligence doesn't seem to respond well to the slow-moving catastrophes.
Mm. Um, Now, I have a theory. I wrote a short book about this, probably way less popular than even yours. Our agriculture is basically built around a set of species from a grassland ecosystem. That's kind of like the bulk, the key trick that humans managed to cobble together in multiple parts of the world. And I wonder if the next few centuries could see different kinds of ecosystems developing domesticated packages of species. And one that springs to mind is the shallow marine environment, that there's a host of potential species that humans could come into symbiosis with to create a new kind of agriculture that thrives in shallow, salty water. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the greatest biomes going forward is going to be the mangrove swamp.
Mm,
If you go to coastal Australia, as you have, you go to Cairns, you go to Top End, I don't care where you go, you see the mangroves. Now, a mangrove at the moment, there's nothing in it that we can eat. But what we do have is CRISPR. We have
hmm
genetic engineering. And my thought has always been take that particular type of plant, which is living in salt water, and that's the biome that's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as the sea level rises. You're going to have more and more mangrove swamps.
mm,
If we could genetically engineer mangroves into producing food that we can eat, then this is one solution. And again, this is technology. This is the road out to me is technology. If we were clever enough to really change from, as you said, this grassland biome type of food that we have, grassland and the cows eating on it,
Mm,
to something where it's shallow seagrass, it's mangroves, it's the shallow, huge areas of these gigantic new epiric seas that are going to start flooding continents. If you
mm.
can engineer those for food processing, we'll probably be okay.
There's an old saying that I was born too late to explore the world and too early to explore the stars. But has humanity effectively created a new planet right under our feet that we need to explore in like the coming centuries?
Well, the new planet, during my lifetime, there have been a bunch of them that have been discovered. And the one that I think is the most interesting was the deep microbial biosphere. We
Mm,
had no idea. Tommy Gold going down with these tubes looking for oil, and all of a sudden they started pulling microbes out from kilometers deep, and
mm,
then recognizing that even in basalt, many kilometers deep, you have these microbes living on hydrogen coming from rocks. That's a whole new world we didn't quite expect.
mm,
I
mm,
had a grad student, one of my most cited papers I had almost nothing to do with. He was a really smart guy, and he went to NASA, who he now works for, David Smith, and he talked NASA into giving him a U-2 spy plane, and they went up as high as this plane could go with a little scoop and caught aerial plankton. And
mm,
the diversity of microbes in there, what I hadn't realized is our high alpine lakes, high in the mountains, 10,000, 13,000 feet. They're fertilized entirely by bacteria falling out of the sky onto them.
mhm,
And again, this bacterial s- biosphere up there, is there any way? It's very thinly populated, but it's enormous. Is there any
mm,
way to farm that?
mm,
Is there a way that we can change the rules?
mm. Um, Also, a thing I've explored before, is there evidence that planet Earth is getting better at bouncing back from mass extinctions over time? Is like you do something over and over again, a living system is going to eventually figure out how to respond to it, surely.
Well, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to go back to my go-to whenever I think I can't understand something. I just blame the plants. I think plants have changed the rules so absolutely thoroughly. So the ones that really I think are the best object lessons are the snowball Earths.
Hmm.
And these two gigantic, we had 2.3 billion, we had a big snowball Earth, and it got really cold really fast. And that seems to be associated with a reduction of carbon dioxide because you start getting more and more types of plants and they pull CO2 out. And again, CO2 is this knife edge. It doesn't take much reduction in it to radically change temperatures we've talked about.
Mm,
And then the other one is the most recent one, and so beautifully shown near Adelaide. You've got the rocks demonstrating that you had these beautiful low latitude ice material. You've got records of these glacial deposits at the equator.
mm,
Another snowball,
mm,
700 million.
mm,
And once again, it's because we have the formation of kelp and the large, for the first time, multicellular plants in the ocean.
mm,
And I think also taking place then, the very first on land fungi, there's 700 million, they get on land. They suck CO2 out. You do that, and boom, down goes the temperature, up goes the ice. So we don't see that anymore.
mm,
We don't see it because we have changed the way the world, and we've changed how much CO2 there is in the atmosphere, but we now have these really complex plant-driven communities that whenever a new type of plant arrives, it changes the world.
mm,
The longest ice age of the Phanerozoic, the time of animals, started in the Devonian.
mm,
It took place when the first forests appear. Their roots go down deep. They break up rocks down there. The rocks are in contact with the atmosphere. CO2 is pulled out by this chemical reaction of CO2 in the atmosphere with silica minerals. You make clay.
mm.
Down goes the CO2. Boom. There you get this ice age again. It lasted 70 million years.
Mm. Well, I guess I was thinking more about the flashy mass extinctions, like an object hitting the planet, or a massive volcanic excursion. Yeah, I wonder. I know. I did an article where I kind of tried to cobble this together and looked at the various big mass extinctions and how long it took for complex life to come back. And I think I saw a signal that it was taking less and less time for complex life to find a way to reestablish complex ecosystems.
But that may just be a function of the fact that the diversity keeps increasing,
Mm,
that
mm.
you have so many more creatures at each mass extinction, and therefore you have much larger root stocks to tap to bring back the next group.
Yeah.
Your genetic diversity of the planet in animals is so rapidly increased through time that you just have a much bigger selection of survivors.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the argument for diversity in ecosystems. It makes them resilient because you can afford to lose a bigger percentage of the species and still maintain basic function. Well, I also wonder, could humans play a role in making the planet more resilient to those kind of mass extinctions in the future? And I would compare the amount of energy and effort to like trying to create a Mars colony versus like maybe bunkers like the Svalbard seed repository, but on steroids.
Well, just once again, this Carl Zimmer article today saying, why don't we start a bunker of microbes? I mean,
Hmm.
it sounds to me like one of these microbial scary movies in a way, but he's saying that these things are very important. And what leads the first step out of a mass extinction are the microbes themselves, really. I
Hmm.
mean, you
Hmm.
have these microbial ecosystems that start rebuilding themselves, and the microbes, of course, are what makes it possible to have plant communities. And
Hmm.
you're not going to have animals until you reproduce a whole bunch of plants that can produce food. So, in
Hmm.
a way, yeah, I think we could probably help and get through this, but try to pitch that to anybody needing the many billions. I mean, look at Elon. He could do any of this stuff. This guy is impossibly rich.
It,
And yet he
it,
wants to throw it into Mars?
yeah. Well, it gets back to the idea that we love quick, flashy things like sending a rocket to Mars and oh, we can as animals, that's something that registers. But the idea of building a bunker and then maintaining it for thousands or millions of years on the odd chance that eventually a meteor is going to hit the Earth and cause a major disaster, I don't think we have that kind of plant type patience to hang around that long on a project and wait for a payoff.
There's a there's an analog to this in a way that there's a famous science fiction book that I loved back when I was in college, A Canticle for Leibowitz, in which there's been a nuclear the book opens with these Catholic priests who are trying to reconstruct what the civilization was like before wholesale nuclear, and it takes them years and years and years to sort of pull back together and make this complex system where you can build atomic weapons again, and
Mm.
which they, of course, unleash again. So, yeah. So, in a way, I look at this history of these animal and plant civilizations prior to mass extinctions, and then we have the gigantic nuclear analog taking place. The mass extinction, whatever causes it, too much
Mm.
CO2. But they never come back the same, do they?
Mm.
I mean,
Mm.
in the book, it comes back the Catholics are there still, but in reality, after every mass extinction, there's different stuff. There's different dominance. And
Mm.
so it's very interesting. It takes out the incumbents. Think about the brachiopods, these tiny little humble two-shelled animals that look like clams, and how they held off the bivalves for 200 million years. And yet bivalves are so much more efficient. One of my grad students was looking at oxygen consumption in clams versus brachiopods. And brachiopods are terrible,
Mm.
but incumbents hold and they rule. It's tough
Mm.
to kick them out. Then
Mm.
the mass extinctions change all that.
Mm. Oh, well, a related question I wanted to ask. How do you see humans changing the pattern of evolution? And the analogy I always go back to is when uh, the insects and the flowering plants paired up with each other and caused this massive explosion in the diversity of both sides of that symbiosis. Could humans go through a similar kind of uh, relationship, getting involved, as becoming a symbiont in the evolution of pretty much everything on the planet? Like we're so adaptable that we could potentially influence the evolution of anything.
Well, I think we're already doing it. Again, once again, the just unlocking the key using CRISPR. The fact that we can go in and mess with chromosomes and genes in such a way that hasn't been done except through chance. In the
Mm,
back, it was always rolling dice in the past. And now humans, very smart humans, can make that decision. But what we humans haven't recognized is how easily genes jump.
mm,
Again, this recognition that you may be building some plant which then you can throw the worst pesticide in the world all around and it's killing all the bugs. And then the bugs say, well, wait a minute. I want one of those genes that makes that like the plants have. And so now you can't kill me. And we're seeing that taking place already, of course.
Mm.
Well-meaning is what we try to be, but we're just blunt instrument is what where we are now. And we're
Yeah.
not sophisticated in any of this gene stuff. We don't know what we're doing yet, but
Yeah.
we are unleashing a whole lot of new type of biology. Of that, I'm sure.
I also wonder if a key difference can be that natural selection is kind of limited to a really harsh, steepest descent towards fitness, and that humans have this weird capacity to uh, value and empathize and protect organisms in an early stage of their evolution. Whereas if they were just out in the open environment, some other thing that's already better at doing their job would just completely wipe them off the map. Whereas humans can create these little bubbles of protection. I mean, it's almost like the way mammals insulate their young from the harsh realities of the whole open environment until they get to a stage where they can stand on their own feet. Does that feel like it's all part of a general trend towards uh, greater investment in the next generation? But humans have the capacity to do that to other species through their evolutionary process.
Well, the other side of that, and again, I'm going back to a podcast I did yesterday, and they're asking me about why is it that nautilus shells are almost on the they are on the verge of extinction in the Philippines, and
Mm.
we've already shown that one specific genetic unique stock in the Philippines is now extinct. It
Hmm.
was present all the way until the 1990s, and they're being fished out. And they're being fished out. Why? It's not that anybody wants to eat them. I've eaten nautilus. It's awful. It's got the sulfur taste. There's just nothing you want to eat. But why is it that shell is so enigmatic and alluring to us to the point that you want it? And I started thinking about the collector gene that we humans have. That, well, what's really grotesque to me is the seashell trade.
Yeah.
And when I was a little boy, oh, I want a shell collection. I want a mineral collection. I want this and that. And luckily, my collector gene wasn't really however you want to say, but there are people on this planet where it's they want it and they're going to get it. And we're wiping out mollusks, gastropods,
Mm.
because they're pretty. And we started thinking about what is it if you could group the species that we've driven to extinction? What is it about them? Well, either they're beautiful and we want it and we want to put it in a room and we can keep it, or it tastes really good,
Mm.
or it's a threat to us or it's just big and at small numbers like whales, and we just stupidly kill it with our big ships, even if we're no longer harvesting, although we're still harvesting. So there are just certain characters I think that animals have now that in the age of humans are really negative
Mm.
and will drive them to extinction in all probability, unless we change our ways.
I guess even species that do become domesticated can become uh, distorted or degraded by human fashions. I would look at like the fancy pet breeding
Yes.
industry where they've taken animals to the point where they can barely reproduce without like massive interventions because they want them to look a particular way just for human status.
Well, there was that book a few years ago, well, 10 years ago. I actually met the author. Well, he was a piece of work, The World Without Us. And he
Mm.
says, let's just make humans disappear all of a sudden. And what happens? But some of the really interesting chapters, it was a great, interesting idea. The interesting chapters were about our dogs and cats.
Mm.
And if we remove the human protectors of dogs and cats, how quickly they go extinct because we have taken out this ability for, I mean, we've got two dogs here. I got a poodle and a beautiful spaniel, and they'd starve to death. You know, they're just these clunky creatures, and they're not going to catch anything, and they're going to starve. So, yeah, we breed into our domesticated animals stupidity, it seems.
Mm, mm. I guess Australia is an interesting example because we've got such a thriving feral cat and dog population here. They're not just reverting back to their traditional pre-domestication form, they're changing on top of that in interesting ways.
Well, the cats in 2007, I always tried to go to Australia for sabbaticals. In 2007, I spent a year in Perth. And I remember getting off the airplane, and one of the first things I was handed was, please sign this. Let's kill all the cats in Australia. And of
Mm,
course, I'm a cat owner, and we'd given our cat away to go be with somebody for a year. And I thought, well, oh, those poor cats. And then all of a sudden, I started looking at what your cats are doing. And you're right, they're evolving very quickly.
mm,
They're ferocious beasts. And one of the saddest things is that when I went to Adelaide in 2014, I love the ground birds of Australia, the galahs. It's just the the cockatoos, the beautiful stuff. We don't have ground birds in the States.
mm,
We have pigeons in the cities where there are fewer cats, but we don't have them. And that you have this huge population of gorgeous animals that the cats are just wiping out.
mm,
And there were far fewer in Adelaide than I remember even in 2007. And they said, yeah, the cats are just cleaning them out.
mm, mm. Now, another really out there idea that I have. So, during the transition between unicellularity and multicellularity, plants and animals kind of got there first and dominated those niches. And I think you could argue that's made it very difficult for other unicellular protists to go down a similar path because there's already plants doing that job. And I wonder if humans in the future could have a role in helping other families of protists, because there's dozens and dozens of really amazing diverse protists out there, helping them transition into becoming multicellular to create whole new kingdoms of life.
The, you were very good to send me a list of your interesting ideas. And the interesting thing about great ideas, and they are fantastic ideas and things that really got me thinking today,
Mm,
but science fiction writers also sometimes come up with the same ideas that we do. And I wish I could remember the author, but I read this book where there's way more symbiosis than, I mean, we have a few symbiotic, well, not a few. Look at corals. You know,
mm,
they have those zooxanthellae, and without them, they're screwed. And you can really think of us with our gut biome. That's symbiosis.
mm,
But think of it where, in fact, you have 30 or 40% of the cells in your body are different species.
hmm
A huge number, a greater percentage by volume than we have. And one of the questions you brought about was, I think, touching on that. What if we had a planet where there is a higher percentage of symbiosis and everything is ecosystems depending on a much greater degree of symbiosis?
hmm
So if we took 100 Earth-like planets and looked at the animals that may or may not arise, but the ones that do have animals, how many look like ours and how many take off in directions that you're suggesting? I
mm,
thought that was a beautiful, very interesting idea you had that I think is something that really should be looked at.
mm, mm, mm. Um, well, a related question. Are humans different enough from other primates and mammals that we could even be considered like the foundation of a new classification? Like our metabolism and our body plan has changed quite dramatically in a short period of time. Could we be like the first trilobite and that we're on the verge of like proliferating into a bunch of different species, like a whole clade of our own?
Well, another way you could look at that, let me turn that on its head a little bit. Let's look at humans pre-agriculture. So let's go
Mm,
back 15,000 years ago. And we now know that if you look at the human genome, that in fact, the greatest rate of genetic change within us of the last, I think it's the last 100,000 years, took place 12 to 10,000 years ago
mm,
from two things, agriculture and more of us living in tight contact with other humans, cities.
mm,
When you start putting humans into these places where you live permanently, you're really exchanging a whole lot of microbes back and forth in ways that didn't happen before.
mm,
And so the evolution of our our systems to fight off disease, number one, and number two, certainly how our guts and our gut biome has changed. You could make the sense that Homo sapiens sapiens and Homo sapiens today are two different things.
mhm.
That we ought to be a wholly different species now compared to what we were before agriculture in cities. And I think that leads right back to what you're saying here is that it was took technology to make agriculture, took technology to make cities.
Mm.
We're different creatures pre and post.
Definitely, if you like one way of looking at species is ecosystem function, and the
Yep.
ecosystem function of agricultural humans versus forager humans is extremely different. So yeah, I like that idea. You're throwing that back at me and giving me something to think about.
Another way to think about different species is behavior.
Mm, mm,
And behavior, look at the behavior of humans that pre and post agriculture.
mm, mm,
What percentage of us were involved in agriculture? The other aspect, what percentage of us were soldiers prior to agriculture? Almost none,
mm,
because soldiers need to carry food. To
hmm
carry food, you've got to have food stores and food storage. You're not grabbing the food you're going to eat right now. So when you have stored grain, you could have soldiers and
mm,
they go off and conquer somebody else. That behavior may have been a consequence of getting agriculture.
mm. Now, another topic I really want to ask you about. So, the way our geological cycles work, there's been a general trend for atmospheric carbon dioxide to decrease over time as it gets locked up in various sediments. And it reached a record low level around about the time that humans emerged in our recognizable modern form. Do you think there is a link between those two events, that something about that record low CO2 level helped bring humans into existence?
Well, certainly it took very cold climate to produce the really grains that keep us sustained now.
Mhm.
I've worked an awful lot at the equator, and you don't see wheat farms. I mean, it's the cold temperature grains, and until we got to a climate post-Pleistocene, but even during the Pleistocene, where you could have large areas with grassland, and you could get these C3, C4 plants working into these communities,
Mm,
that you couldn't get really agriculture as certainly as we know it today. Um, Going forward, we're going to be heading back to sort of that pre-Pleistocene type of climate. It's a great idea, and where I really think that the great revolution we should be thinking about ever more is the epigenome as well as the genome.
mm, mm,
I wrote this book called Lamarck's Revenge, and it just got slaughtered and no sales whatsoever. But the stuff I was learning, thinking about how important it is and how we do pass on to our descendants, Darwin said no. And what Lamarck said was, here's what happens. An organism enters an environment that has radically changed. And the first thing that organism does, if it wants to live, and by radical change, it has to cause that organism to change behavior.
mm,
Lamarck said, look first. The first thing that happens in a catastrophe, the mass extinctions, is you're going to see a behavioral change. When you start having a behavioral change, selection is going to select different types of organisms based on that behavior. There is a linkage between behavior and genetics, but there's a huge linkage between behavior and epigenetics. And epigenetics, once again, is that it used to be thought that nothing you did in your life is ever going to compromise your children.
mm,
I work in one of the saddest places on the planet, Papua New Guinea. Everybody there chews betel nut. You get on Air New Guinea, and there's a big sign right there, no spitting in the aisle. Now, how many places on Earth do you have airlines who tell you not to spit? And the reason you spit, what percent, have you ever been to PNG?
no, 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 no. I have to check it
I'd
out one
walk for
day.
red because it's equivalent to, we were having this terrible, terrible epidemic of drugs in America and drugs in Australia, drugs, fentanyl. But what would it be like if speed, I mean, the hardcore speed that was the pre-fentanyl, was free and on a tree? And
Hmm
in fact, you're living in such hot, horrible temperature. And to live, you've got to do work. And to get through that 100-degree, huge, humid day, you get this little nut off a tree, you chew it, and it grinds your teeth down to nothing because you have to chew it with coral, but it gives you this huge burst of energy.
mm,
Now, I have not tried betel nut, but I've had assistants, European assistants with me that have, and they say it's just it's like super coffee. It's a caffeine burst.
mm,
And you forget how hot you are, and you can work 15, 20 minutes, a half hour. Then you chew some more,
mm,
and you can get through the day. But what happens is it causes methylation on your DNA, of genes on your DNA, and little methyl molecules attach to parts, and you pass that on. There's an epidemic of huge problems, mental problems in PNG. It's traumatic in that there is uh, the inability to concentrate, the inability to read, the inability to stay in focus, and gigantic depression in these kids of the parents chewing betel nut. You go to these places, there's probably 1 billion people on the planet chewing betel nut right now.
Mm.
There's a gigantic epigenetic consequence of this.
A related, well, a tangential thought. When the social insects first started living in like giant swarms and colonies, do you think they went through a similar kind of psychological process that the colonies got large before the individuals were really fully adapted to living in those conditions?
Oh,
There must have been a
yeah.
mismatch, at least temporarily.
To me, and I try to write this book and understand this is gigantic, that this is the new revolution in biology to me, trying
Mm,
to understand the epigenome. I
mm,
mean, we've been understanding the genome and put all this money into it. But the fact that you start looking at in humans and you look at behavior and human behavior, and people started looking at the genomes of the ultra religious in the United States and began seeing that we thought, well, these kids are super religious because their parents are. And I'm sure there's a lot to it.
mm,
But they started seeing that there is a consequence, there is an evolution and an inheritance that is caused by behavior of the parent as well as the genes of the parent.
hmm
That is what Lamarck was really saying. And that's why um, Lamarck is taught as a monster in all biology classes. You always have the picture of the giraffe, and people laugh at Lamarck.
mm.
Darwin was right, Lamarck was wrong. And that's why I titled the book Lamarck's Revenge and put a picture of a giraffe on the cover.
Mm, mm. Oh, I'll skip forward to a question that I wanted to ask later. Um, what what do you think is the dark matter of biology? Like, what are the mysteries that are like sitting in plain sight that the dominant culture of biology kind of avoids looking at because they're just too complicated and thorny, and nobody knows how to write papers out of them that'll get published.
Time. Biology doesn't understand time, and
Ah,
paleontologists don't understand biology.
yes.
We call them paleobiologists, and you alluded to that, but to be trained as a paleontologist, you go through geology. To be trained as a biologist and a molecular biologist, you get no concept of time or the history of life, or unless you took some course, a 100 level course.
hmm
But the deep understanding of life's history and the deep understanding of how time affects biology is missing in biology. Whereas we in the geological side, we don't understand DNA and genes and how this works.
Mm.
There is still a wall between us. That's where I think the mystery is.
Well, that makes me think like the classic Darwinian model of evolution of accumulation, gradual accumulation of small mutations, eventually like leading you somewhere useful and interesting and different. Um, that kind of just hand waves that, oh, well, it just takes, millions of years for it to happen. And therefore it's kind of untestable experimentally because you don't have DNA usually from millions of years ago. You can
You don't.
infer things from the genome if you have a model mathematically to apply to it.
Yep.
But that makes me wonder about the importance of hybridization and like these rapid disruptions of genetic structures that I think is starting to be realized is a more essential process in evolution. Does paleontology have anything to offer on that front?
We can wave our hands.
Well,
Hi, are you a problem? We
well,
don't, we can't see you or touch you, but are you, hey, hi,
well,
see ya.
I'm thinking of the idea of punctuated equilibrium that seems to be a common pattern in the fossil record, that species, at least morphologically, seem to stay relatively unchanged, and then suddenly a dramatically different form arrives. And admittedly, that could often come from just a small change in the genetic structure can have big impacts on the morphology. But I think the alternate explanation that I'm favoring is that hybridization, and particularly wide hybridization that happens very rarely, might be a much more important part of how evolution works. Do you have any perspectives on that?
I don't. I saw the question earlier when you sent me this, and I thought it was fascinating. And I've
Mm,
been trying to put it around in my mind. I can't speak to it, but let me ask, or at least pose another aspect about the history of life that separates we who study the history of life from the biologists. So here's a question that biologists haven't thought about, but should, and that we can't answer from the rock side. Why haven't there been any new phyla since the Cambrian explosion?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what is? Yeah, that's a profound mystery. I mean, you go back to Gould and Wonderful Life, and what Gould was trying to say was that, in fact, you had a whole bunch of phyla, and they winnowed out. And then, of course, Conway Morris, his great nemesis and enemy at the end. I know them both. I knew them both very, very well, and
Mm,
they're both sweet guys. But boy, they hated each other. And Conway Morris said, no, that's not true at all, that blah, blah, blah. But Gould points out to the wonderful monsters in Wonderful Life that these really strange creatures out there. But the question I've come up with is, or even thinking about, and again, I'm so ignorant of the chemistry of life, but people have posed the idea, has the DNA molecule itself in animals, long-lived animals, has it got so filled up with junk DNA and garbage within it that it's no longer capable of such radical, profound changes that could lead to an entirely new body plan?
mm.
Have we just the process of time on DNA? Is there some window of time where DNA allows itself to produce all this wonderful stuff that is finite, that is not an infinite molecule of infinite change? You have a window where enormous change could take place and then it's closed.
Interesting. I love that idea. Well, I have a related question, and this ties back to the Nautilus, and it's the example of living fossil phyla. So, like the coelacanth species that have been around, they're often like the last surviving lineage of something that was more diverse in the past, and it seems to remain unchanged, at least morphologically, right up until the present day. And I wonder if this might be an indirect piece of evidence about the importance of hybridization in speciation, that when you just end up with one form left of a species, there's nothing close enough that it can hybridize with to shake up its genome and generate new species. Have you seen that idea thrown around before?
No, but what I do know about Nautilus is that this idea that it's come down to us through many, many millions of years unchanged is nonsensical. I'm
Ah,
just
okay.
finishing, yeah, I'm just finishing an enormous paper that I've been working on for 3 years. It's 100 pages long. It's for the Journal of the Zoological of the Linnaean Society. And so I think the famous animals that Linnaeus named, the Nautilus Linnaeus 1758 is certainly one of them.
Mm,
But all of the species from the Ice Age on are radically different from
mhm.
those that came before the Ice Ages.
Okay.
And what happened was nautiloids were everywhere in the Miocene, so up to 5 million years ago, and there was a global extinction of them everywhere, except one or two seem to have escaped at the end of the Miocene. And they survive now in radically different environments. So I have a picture that was just accepted by Nature. It's going to come out in a week or so,
Mm.
where I show through oxygen isotopes that all of the pre-Pleistocene nautiloids lived in super warm water. All of the nautiloids today live in super cold water and in entirely different places in front
Ah,
of reefs.
okay.
None of them back in the day did. These
That
things, one
then,
escaped.
yeah, Nautilus is a very bad example then of that
It is.
pattern. But
And when
there
you
might
come
be
to
other things like ginkgo, for example, which would be fit
I've
for the
got
pattern.
geckos in my garden, and you're right, this whole living fossil idea. But even look at the coelacanths. I mean, that's a classic example. And
Mm.
yet, when I look at the Cretaceous coelacanths, they look nothing like the modern form.
Okay,
And
okay.
they're small. I mean, they got the same sort of shape, but they're totally different species,
Yep.
and they're living in radically different places. So this is a couple you've got a museum of relic stuff, but once it gets to a new place, they speciate and produce their own sets. We are now finding more and more and more species of nautilus.
Hmm.
Used to be
Okay.
there were only three. I think we're up to 15 now.
I'll
And
I'll bu-
almost
I'll
every
burn down that theory then.
well, no, it doesn't mean that it's wrong at all. But in this
Mm.
particular case, what if you really, but it's taken me a whole lifetime for one animal to get any sort of understanding, which
Yeah.
also shows how short-lived we are and
Yep.
how little anybody can do in a lifetime.
Yeah. Yep.
Uh, 50 years ago today, I did my first Nautilus work. I was in New Caledonia in 1975,
Mm,
and still there 50 years ago doing this stuff, diving with these guys. It's the only place in the world they come shallow.
mm.
This is great.
Now, if humanity is forced to give up on its dream of space colonization, what new visions for the future could you see us grabbing onto? Like, we've got probably about 500 million years ahead of us, a staycation on planet Earth. What could we do with that time?
Well, we probably, I mean, how long we can survive on this planet is one of the great ideas for getting off is you don't want all your eggs in the same basket. Another trite saying, which I
Mm,
understand,
hmm
is that if we're stuck here, we're stuck here. Um, I wrote a book called The Medea Hypothesis. One of my really cynical negative points of view is that life is ultimately suicidal. It's pretty simplified, but nevertheless, what I said at the end, the hopeful part is the only way out is intelligence.
mm,
I mean, we're going to be doomed by too little CO2. That's the irony. That's the biggest irony I know of, is the lack of CO2 is what will be the end of life on planet Earth as we know it.
mm,
But I mean, what we're doing right now, we can easily release CO2 out of limestone. We
mm,
can engineer limestone CO2 production all the way up to the point where the sun, which in 5 billion years gets really large really fast, and that's the end of us.
mm.
But it's not 500 million years we have 5 billion years.
Oh, wow. Okay. I've
Yeah,
seen
we got
different estimates based on which
like
factor starts to intervene.
5 billion. Now, the problem is that the oceans might disappear in less than a billion.
Hmm
And CO2 is going to drop to the point that plant life is going to drop to zero, where you can't get photosynthesis and oxygen disappears. But we can engineer all that stuff.
hmm
We can think our way out of this. That to me is the challenge for humanity. Can we last till the sun kills us off?
hmm Um, do you think it might be possible for multicellular life to evolve into a spacefaring form, like no rocket ship needed, kind of like a more extreme version of the transition of life from the ocean onto the land?
Boy, it's hard to understand where the energy would come from other than sunlight.
Mm,
But once again, there's any number of science fiction stories where huge spacefaring creatures float through. And I think there's a brand new movie about to come out by the guy who did The Martian,
hmm
where he sends off astronauts and because there's a spacefaring creature that causes the sun to go dark.
Ah, yes.
So that book is just turned into a movie, so we're going to see it. Again, I'm more interested in the speculative evolution of Earth creatures. I'm just not smart enough to understand the physics of living in space.
Mm. The thing that gives me hope, I think they swabbed the outside of the International Space Station, and there's like microbes all over it, and they're scratching their head trying to figure out what they're doing out there.
Yeah, well, this is the idea. Are we Martians or are the Martians Earth creatures from, I mean, there's a lot of interplanetary panspermia taking place. So
Hmm
did we seed Mars? Did Mars seed us? And with our early space probes, have we started life on Mars as a new type of life, Earth life on Mars now?
Mm. Just as an aside, a really interesting theory I saw recently is that with the Big Bang model, there might have been a Goldilocks era in the early universe when it had around about the right temperature for at least biomolecules to start forming before everything got kind of blown further apart. I don't know, it just scratches an itch somewhere deep in my brain. Um, Now, you and I both have a really deep fascination with cephalopods. I had pet ones that I caught at the local beach when I was a kid that I just loved interacting with. But
What kinds? Sepia, cuttlefish, or octopus?
a bit of both, a bit of both. Yeah, I had one octopus in particular that deliberately destroyed the tank every night, and then in the morning it would be sitting there staring directly into my eyes. It knew
It was.
exactly, yeah, it knew exactly what it was doing because I'm just like, okay, back in the bucket, you can go back into the ocean. Like they're incredibly intelligent species, but it makes me really fascinated about what other life forms do you think could eventually evolve intelligence that is comparable to humans?
Well, part of our conceit is that we define intelligence as related to what we call it, what we think we are,
Yeah.
our intelligence, right? How can you say that a tree sitting there in all its firmament, gigantic, centuries old, how is that not intelligent?
Hmm.
It's again, it's labeling. I understand that, but to me, you're touching about. I'm not even going to try to answer that, but I am going to hit one of my pet interests is octopus and intelligence. You probably saw that fabulous movie, My Octopus Teacher, and the reason I got started in cephalopods was a grandson of the great H.G. Wells. His name was Martin Wells, Cambridge professor, studied cephalopod intelligence. So he wrote a beautiful book called Brain and Behavior in Octopus. And the tragedy, he said, is that, of course, the big tragedy, these things have built this chemical called octopine that when an octopus starts developing its sex organs, it releases a chemical that kills it.
Hmm.
Whether it has sex or not, it's going to die. The eggs start forming, the ovaries are built, the testes are built, got to kill that octopus. So 10, 15 years ago, I said to my students, look, is there anybody here who knows biology well enough that we could engineer an octopus that doesn't have octopine? And so the analogy, yeah. Well, this
Yeah.
is a novel I'm going to write.
Mm.
So the analogy is I try to say, how many 1-year-old humans have you ever known? So we've all said our own or our friends, and you got these little tiny creatures, and they smile at you and they make you do stuff, they perturb you, they do all the stuff that they do. But they're not building radio telescopes. They're
Yeah.
not writing sonnets. They're not doing any of that stuff. And yet you can't say they're not intelligent.
Mm.
There is a component of years of experience that affects how brains develop and where they go. So let's take an octopus and extend its life to 20 years and then ask that octopus to talk to us.
Yeah. Yeah. I
That's
love
a
it.
different creature.
Yeah.
That's a whole different ballpark. And the question one has as a student of cephalopod paleontology, when did this happen? I now think some of my nautilus are 100 years old. Seriously, we have another new paper
Yeah.
coming out. We've done the radiometrics on the shells. So we have them up to 30 years old. A 30-year-old nautilus is a whole different world from a 3-year-old octopus.
Mm.
Now, they don't have the intelligence. They certainly don't have giant brains. They don't have any of this stuff. But why did octopus take that route? I mean, why do you have short-lived octopus? That's a cruel evolution that dictated that little nonsense. And when did that happen?
Mm. Mm. I believe the giant Atlantic octopi that live up in the cold water live for at least a few years. Do they show any hints of what might be possible?
Well, we have the biggest octopus in the world in Puget Sound, where I live. The North Pacific it really is Octopus dolphinae, and it's still only if it gets to 5 years, that's a miracle.
Mm.
And what happens, of course, we have these big aquaria out here, and they get the big octopus, and then they have to replace them over and over and over because they're still so short-lived.
Mm.
Now they're
Mm.
very intelligent. They can escape almost out of everywhere. And yet we start saying octopus intelligence is based on escape ability. No, there's way more going on.
Mm. Mm. Do you think humans could play a role in bringing other forms of intelligence to maturity, to full potential in other animals? And I think of the history of the Border Collie dogs, that they trace their lineage back to just one incredibly intelligent female dog, I think in the 1800s, that people noticed and they started deliberately saving her puppies and created like a whole new kind of dog function. Do you think we could do that with other species?
Well, I think you missed the point. I think going and looking at dogs, there's going to be a limitation, a wall that's hit. No, African gray parrots.
Mm, mm,
Those are the most intelligent creatures on the planet other than us. I mean, the African grays, and there have been one or two Einstein African gray parrots. I mean, there's the famous example of one that a psychologist had, and the number of words and the ability to write sentences, and that the creatures we most underestimate on the planet are birds. And bird intelligence, we think bird brained. Bird brains are unbelievably efficient.
Mm,
And part of it goes back, there's no better respiration system on the planet than bird respiration. I wrote a whole book about that too, which didn't do too well. But anyway, it was very interesting to me is that if you start thinking about the history of atmospheric change, dinosaurs are a consequence of low oxygen. And they built this fabulous respiratory system in consequence of low Triassic. But parrots, the fact that a parrot sitting there gets 30 to 40% more oxygen per breath than you do,
mm.
their brains are suffused. And when you can super oxygenate a brain cells than brains themselves, they work better.
Another part of that book where I was talking about marine agriculture, evolution of those kind of systems, I a key thing I wondered was holding us back from tree-based agriculture is our inability to get up into the canopy to like do management and harvesting. And one of the species I identified as a potential partner for building forest-based agriculture would be parrots, that they could
Oh,
be partners that can, get up into the canopy. They've got a toolkit built right into the front of their face. We just need to find a way to engineer a win-win situation that the birds and the humans both want to interact with each other for mutual benefit.
well, also, if you want to perturb creatures through some evolutionary change, we already know that parrots are among the longest lived creatures on the planet.
Mm.
It would be very, I think, quite easy to engineer a 200-year-old parrot. So multi-generational parrots themselves, if you get the super breed type, maybe they take over. Who
Yeah,
knows?
yeah.
But you certainly, the problem with parrots is their reproductive cycle. They only produce two babies every 2 or 3 or 4 years. I mean,
Mm,
they don't reproduce much. They're like us in that regard.
mm. I also wanted to ask you, how close do you think paleontology is to discovering everything about the past of life on Earth? Is there some point we're going to run out of like new fossils? We're just maybe going to dig up the same things again, or is it a bottomless pit from your perspective?
No, I think new stuff keeps coming up over and over and over. One of the really great movements forward is molecular paleontology.
Mm,
These molecules that you can find in sediments have so much information in them. I've moved almost entirely now to geochemical work, where we are now capable of getting DNA out of shells. So, oh yeah, so we can take an old Nautilus shell and easily take the DNA out of it
mm,
and understand it. But one of the cool things is that we can take an old clamshell and I can tell you what was the nature of plankton 1,000 years ago compared to
mm.
the nature of plankton today, because these things are recording carbon and nitrogen isotopes that give you very, very powerful indicators of trophic level. So we are looking at trying to understand. And the very cool thing, someone just found a shipwreck from the 1600s, 16, middle 1600s in Indonesia. It was a Dutch ship. It went down, and part of what it went down with were Nautilus shells that some of the crew were going to bring back. So the guy who is looking at these, he's an Australian. So he's doing this thesis on shipwrecks. And he gets hold of me, Mr. Nautilus, and he said, "Hey, what do you think? Do you know what species they are?" Well, I said, "If you send me a piece of it, I can tell you very quickly what species it is. But I'm more interested in understanding, taking a piece of that shell and understanding the trophic level of that Nautilus then compared to the same species which still exists in Indonesia now.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
has the appearance of humans radically changed?" And one of my thoughts when I lived in Australia was doing the same with sepia. Go out to any Australian beach. There's so many cuttlefish.
Mm.
Dig down into the sand dunes, and you can get that very quickly to 1,000 years old. The
Interesting.
cuttlebones are data loggers.
Yep.
They log the temperature they grew at, the nitrogen, what they ate, and all that stuff. What are the modern day sepias eating compared to what they did 1,000 years ago?
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
fun way to use stuff. So I have to live another 100 years. There's too much fun stuff to do.
Okay, okay, you got me excited. Now, I have a bit of a theory that I would love to get your perspective on because you're interested in like the deep origin of life and rare earth hypothesis. This ties directly into that. So give me a second and I'll run through the parts of it. So, um, so there's research that suggests that bacteria-like organisms form on rocky planets almost as soon as they cool down, like they just pop out of nowhere. And Earth has two lineages like that, the bacteria and the more recently discovered archaea, which they're very different, and the exact origins of them are unknown. But we do know that they underwent endosymbiosis. They kind of shacked up with each other to create the eukaryotes, and that led to complex multicellular life. So my theory is that on a rocky planet, usually what happens is one of those bacterial lineages emerges, and as soon as it appears, it monopolizes all of the resources, the prebiotic resources that would allow potentially a second or a third lineage to emerge. So you end up locked in just one. So if you only had bacteria, it wouldn't be easy to end up with complex multicellular life. So, where I think Earth is really strange is that we were originally a twin planet system. What is now the Moon was a protoplanet that collided with Earth early in its evolution. So, my theory is that different bacterial type lineages formed on those two planets. So, we had bacteria on Earth, for example, and archaea on the Moon. And the collision happened at just the right time with just the right amount of energy to allow those two lineages to be brought together on Earth. And it turned Earth into a really strange planet as well. Like our core is much bigger than typical,
Yeah.
which gives us a magnetic field and all of these extra things. But yeah, what the theory I haven't seen before is that those two prokaryotic lineages came from the two planets and were brought together in a really unlikely event. And I want to get your take on that kind of wild theory.
Well, it's a great idea. As in so many great ideas, how does one test it? We'd have to get out to other rocky planets to see that there's one or two. How do we get to another rocky planet? And the problem there, I mean, getting to Mars is the clear thing to do,
Yeah.
is to get to Mars and core down. You're not, I don't think you'll have to find any living life on Mars, but I think you'll find biomarkers down in the sediments indicating that would tell you what was there
Mm,
or nothing was there. And if you got this Thea idea, because we really do think that it was a Mars-sized planet that created this, you might have a great shot at this. The other place to get to Venus.
mm.
That's a higher
Well,
technical.
what about the moon? Like it's quite warm as you go into the core. So in the deep moon biosphere, there might still be a Goldilocks zone where prokaryotic life can hang on. And I'm guessing if you could drill down to it and found it was only archaea, but no bacteria, if there was no bat contamination, but I mean there could have been bat contamination given the models I've seen of the collision. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's a
The other side of the moon, and they've called the moon the Earth's attic. There is more pristine early Earth rock on the moon than there is on Earth. You go
hmm
back to the Hadean rock, there's none of it that hasn't been metamorphosed and just ruined on this planet. But the heavy bombardment threw so much stuff on the moon
mm,
that you have to ask how many microbes were tossed onto the moon, and could any of these? We know they can survive in space, right?
mm.
You just because you get blasted to the moon doesn't mean you're automatically going to die.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, if you can land in some place where you could somehow mine the hydrogen, maybe you could just keep it going.
Mm,
Um, it's a wonderful idea. My vision of how life started on Earth was that instead of we had this single species come into existence, is that we had a zoo. We had thousands of chemically different types of life, and that natural selection then winnows that out. I mean,
hmm
what's really surprising to me, and I ask my students, why is it that Earth life, all Earth life, has 20 amino acids? Why, and why those 20?
mm,
And so the two possibilities the students always come up with, the same two I come up with. A, that's the first life out of the gate, and they just by chance found those 20 amino acids worked. And once life starts, it reproduces. And that pattern, you can make life with other amino acids. Or B, those are the 20 most common amino acids that life had. Or C, that those are the best 20 amino acids to make you better than other life with other amino acids. That
mm.
you got all these possibilities. But I really saw this cosmic zoo with lots of different types of life, and the natural selection winnows out. And what we have now is, but I think you've got this hybridization, the best of various different systems integrating through gene jumping.
I like that idea of there being an early zoo that we've only got one remaining lineage left. I mean, almost like if you take the Cambrian explosion, we're not creating phyla anymore. If you fast forward that for billions of years, there might only be, I don't know, arthropods left and everything else has disappeared and just by chance.
Yep, could be there.
Bug planet in the future. Now, I've got a final fun question I ask everyone, and you in particular, I want to hear this answer. If you could wave a magic wand and create a new life form, what would you wish into existence?
Huh. Yeah, that's an interesting point of view. My own sense is it's a life form that we have that I want to bring back.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I'm in love with ammonites.
Hmm.
They're like the chamber nautilus, right? But they had so many different varieties. And the sad thing about the nautiloids is there isn't a great deal of disparity. Diversity in number of species, disparity in the number of body plans. And
Mm,
the nautiloid body plan kept going back and forth to these same sort of looking things. Well, early on, they were all different shapes. But ever since the end of the Paleozoic, they pretty much looked alike.
yeah.
But the Ammonites, boy, they were on LSD. They were completely crazy, going off in all kinds of directions. The end of the Cretaceous, so many different shapes. That's so tragic. That damn asteroid came down and
Mm.
cleaned them all out. But I'd like to bring them back, and the oceans would be a much more exciting place. Diving with ammonites would be very cool.
I love that idea. Like open up a time portal and just herd all of the
Yep,
Ammonites back into the modern ocean.
absolutely, absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, now wrapping up, where can people find your work if they want to read some of your books? Or I think you've done a few lectures on YouTube as well. Where should people look?
Well, as I've been told repeatedly that I'm really good at writing these things and I'm terrible at selling them or flogging them. I don't go on social media. I stay off Facebook. I just don't, I don't know, however my brain works, it's false modesty maybe or whatever, but I don't have a website. I don't have any of this stuff. I've
Mm,
tried to make a website a few times, and for whatever reason, I just couldn't be bothered because I got more important things to do. So, and that's really, they're like your children, right? And I build these children and then I just abandon them. I think they all hate me. So we could have been a seller. And a contender. No, you couldn't. So I don't know. Use bookstores, but people don't even buy books anymore. Everything
mm,
is online, it seems. So I suppose Amazon, Rare Earth was the book that seems to have done the best. I'm supposedly writing a follow-up to it, but to be honest, I've just been too interested in doing my science at the moment. And I've got too many other I really have some questions. And these long sort of end of career papers I'm writing right now
mm.
are coming to fruition and they're all popping out one after another. So I'm not going to answer that. I don't know if there was anything stimulating in this conversation, it probably came from you. And if people look at any of these books, it's thanks to you. So I'll
Uh,
leave it
but,
at that.
well, before we wrap up, I did make a note to just get your perspective on the media environment for science communication. And is the era, I don't know, in some ways, nonfiction books do seem to be having a renaissance, particularly compared to fiction, which I think is struggling a bit more in print form. But yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts about where that could be evolving or where the opportunities could lie.
No, I don't. I used to be hooked in. I had agents and all kinds of other stuff, but your agents are only interested in you based on the sales that you produce.
Mm,
And so I haven't produced any book that's really gotten a lot of attention in some time. So the agents are not interested in me, but I'm very interested in that people keep reading. I'm very much afraid that the most evil form of drug on the planet that's ever been evolved is the smartphone
hmm
to make us dumb. And that what we're seeing now are fewer and fewer people that have the patience to read a book. Maybe you know better than I. That and maybe we all, you and I, people like you and I, we talk to each other and we can understand that we don't this great love of books because I have this great love of books. But what are the tragedies now? I have this bookcase full of books. And as I'm heading towards retirement, I'm looking at all the science books in my office and I'm looking at just throwing them in the
Uh,
dumpster.
Yeah.
Nobody wants them, right? 20, 30-year-old textbooks, they're mostly out of print, but they were fabulous things. They were your friends or your enemies, but they were real powerful objects.
Mm.
And that their fate now is to go into the dumpster. And that seems to be the case for an awful lot of books these days. Maybe tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that there's still hope.
Well, I've seen some people in recent years saying that if you write a book, it's probably going to be read by an LLM, by AI, more than actual humans. And then humans will get like a second-hand, like digested version of the information. But I don't know if that's necessarily an improvement.
That's a rationalization. And
Yeah.
I actually looked on the list, and it looks like almost every single one of my books was taken up by the AIs.
Mm. Mm.
Almost every book that's ever been written was taken up by them. And there's supposedly going to be compensation, but there's nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, those rich guys are way too rich to give money.
Exactly.
So
Well, I mean, they
it's,
looking at their business models. I mean, they're getting paid a lot, but I don't think they're making a lot of money as an entity. It's a big worry.
it is a big worry.
Mm,
It's again, we're sitting in the middle of this ecosystem, and yet you're in the middle of something where you're too close to it and can't see it. I mean, there's
mm,
a bigger picture, but I certainly can't see it.
mm.
Maybe you can. Anyway,
It,
I want
it,
to thank you so much for
oh
this
yes,
chance.
yes,
It's
yeah,
been
yeah,
brilliant to talk to you. Thank you.
yes, yeah. Thank you very much. And yeah, I encourage people to check out your books. They're still around and they are wonderfully written. I really enjoyed reading Future Evolution, and I'm very grateful for the chance to talk today.
All right. Thank you so much.
If you'd like to support the show, get a paid subscription to the Substack. It unlocks the archive of past posts. Otherwise, just get a free subscription to read every post as it comes out weekly. Next week, I talk to Nicholas Maloney about breeding avocado, carob, and golden chinkapins in California.